Greetings. My name is Latorial Faison. I'm a Black poet, author, and educator. Today I'm going to share with you a poem entitled This. This unblue blood and darker skin, this youth and manhood trapped within, this ungrown seed beset with doom, this unknown soul locked up, entombed, this brown face, this topless bottom, this man-child approaching Sodom, this buried chest of uncried tears, this proverb unspoken through the years, this dissonant experience, this scent of crime for innocence, this shoot to kill with both hands up, this birthright linking chains and cuffs, this country's witness to its hate, this issue framed without debate, this urban trend and country woe, this poison root we plant and grow, this history we cannot bear, this melting pot we cannot share, this nightmare that we know is real, this voiceless blackness slaughtered still. I wrote this poem while living in South Korea after the death of Trayvon Martin. And after reading this poem, it could have been written in 1955 after the death of Emmett Till. Could have been written yesterday. You know, this is something to think about. This is something that should not only give African Americans pause, but it should give all Americans, all people, all mankind pause. Because here in America, we have a problem with this. This nightmare that we know is real. This voiceless blackness slaughtered still. Why are we still killing innocent Black people in 2021 and moving forward?
What a great way to start our show today. If you don't know by now, my name is Jason. I'm the engineer. I contribute to the Pastor Study Show. Right before me, you saw Latoria Faison. She is a phenomenal poet. And if you can't tell, we want to start the show and do a different type of show. We a lot of times we do hot topics and things of that nature, but today we wanted to take a step back and we wanted to come in front of the microphone. And the reason why we chose the title in front of the microphone, we want to come from our spaces and come to your space, whether you're at home, you're driving in your car, at work, wherever you may be. We want to meet you where you are. So today we're going to be talking about 3 different questions and how they impact us. The first question is, why are we so grieved with the happenings of our nation? If you've been anywhere, you know what's been going on. Not just the last year, the last several years. It has been a whirlwind of emotions, culture, societal things going on. So we want to talk about that. So we're going to walk through that, each one of us. The second question is, what are we doing to affect the cultural and social unrest? What are we doing personally? And the third question is, what are the next steps to truly receive equity and equality? There's a difference. We're going to talk about all 3 of those questions today. So y'all ready? You ready to join in? Let's dive in for our conversation.
What's up, everybody? This is Pastor Swan. We're doing something fresh today. We're calling it Before the Mic. Just little clips of our thoughts, not just in a radio show format, but just us talking candidly and off the record about how we really feel about stuff. So the first thing is, how do we feel about what's going on in our nation? Why are we so grieved about what's happening? I'm grieved because there's so many things that I see that's happening in our country, from the effects of the coronavirus to our political unrest, to police brutality, to economic disparities, to healthcare disparities. There's a lot going on. And I think it's challenging when you look at it from the perspective of, if you're poor, if you're a minority, if you're a woman, in some cases, you just don't have equal rights. You know, the Bible speaks about justice, that our God is a God of justice. That's what Psalm 89 and 11 says. But there really isn't a lot of justice always in our country. And I think that's the biggest reason why so many people are grieved, because what happens for one person doesn't always happen for the other person. And unless you are a certain skin complexion, or unless you have certain amount of money or a certain level of education, you get afforded opportunities that most people don't. I have a 20-year-old daughter and a 17-year-old son. And in particular for my son, I'm most grieved by the fact that while he's an honor roll student, while he's a great basketball player, while he is a wonderful son and a wonderful human being, I'm grieved by the fact that when he leaves the house, most people won't see that in him. Most people won't see that in me. They just see me as a black man, and they'll see him as a black boy. So I'm grieved by that. That's what Martin Luther King talked about, that we should move beyond the color of our skin and move more so to the content of our character. That was his dream. But unfortunately, even 40 years later, there still are some vestiges of racism and bigotry and prejudice that are still very much alive in our country. And for that, I'm grieved. I'm grieved by the fact that we spend more time talking about what's different about us than we do what's alike. And when you take away all of the political differences and racial differences, when you take away economic disparities and healthcare issues and what we look like or how we dress or where we live or how many degrees on our wall, the bottom line is, when you peel back all those layers, everybody wants to be loved, valued, and affirmed. Everybody wants to know that their life matters. Everybody wants to feel like they are contributing something that is bigger than them. And because we don't focus on that stuff, that's why I believe we're grieved as a nation.
I think we continue to find ourselves in the struggle, and it's really just a struggle just to live and to live in peace. And so, with all of this going on, I think that's what causes me so much grief is to see everything that is really impacting us. And, some things we can prevent, some things we can't, but all of this is causing a lot of suffering within our communities. And it hurts me to see what's going on and a lot of the crises that we're facing because real people continue to be hurt by systems and inequality. And I know. I talk a lot about the systemic impacts that we have, but that's what I do for a living is I work within the system trying to transform it. But really, like I'm not apologetic because I think it's important to talk about the ways that systems create obstacles and injustices for Black people. So, take for example the effects of the pandemic. The world is trying to move on. And in some senses, and we're still dealing with, more cases, more deaths, vaccine hesitancy, inequitable access to healthcare, more unemployment, more potential evictions, more economic disparity, more educational inequality. Um, and as some lawmakers are focused on trying to get back to normal, some of us are reminding them that normal wasn't so great for everybody and that we really need to fight for making those strong investments in bridging the gaps and getting rid of iniquities and not just trying to get back to like regular suppression. And so folks want to talk about how, no one wants to work because of the unemployment benefits and how good those are. But we're really not talking about, well, why were the jobs paying so low to begin with, especially when I think it should be that everyone should have one job and be able to have their needs met, their basic needs met. So, we got to have these full conversations and, people want to feel safe while they're working because it's still a pandemic. There's a lot to consider. And so I think, we get blamed for so much and I'm really grieved about what's happening because it's all connected and the crossroads between the hate-based violence, the attacks on voting rights, health and economic impacts from COVID, police brutality, racism, all of that converges and intersects in our lives and in our community. And that is just so daunting and so overwhelming sometimes. But I also have hope. And that hope is in the fact that we've made progress before because of our own actions and taking our power back and really getting engaged and involved. And so I still have hope, but definitely grief in all that is happening in this moment.
The question is, why am I grieved by the happenings of our nation? The current happenings of our nation. Just a couple of weeks, we heard the George Floyd verdict on Mr. Chauvin. I was not excited to hear the verdict. Did they get it right? Absolutely. But just being honest, was it because of fear what would happen if they didn't do it? Or was it because it was the right thing to do? The right thing to do nowadays isn't the cool thing to do. It's not the socially accepted thing. It's just do what you want to do. Do what you feel. That's why I'm grieved. Everybody just going off feelings and emotions. No one is using logic. No one is going back to the one who created us to give us the insight, to give us the wisdom. That's why I'm grieved. I'm grieved because I have a 1-year-old son that I fear that as he gets older, Lord forbid if he's 6'2", 230 pounds, will his color, will his size be weaponized when he's just like a teddy bear? I often say, this is my boy. This is my baby boy. Will my daughter have a fair share, or a fair shake, rather, at the job she deserves? Or does she have to be twice as good to get the job that the next person can get? Will we ever see racial equality? Will we ever see social justice? I don't want to be cynical and say no, but I just don't know. That's what grieves my heart. The unknown. Never know what tomorrow holds for my family. Never know what tomorrow holds for me. Nothing is guaranteed in this day and age. With all the ills, all the foolishness going on in our nation, that's why I'm grieved. I wonder when are we going to get tired, sick and tired as a nation, and do something different? This is why I'm grieved.
God bless you, my friend. Dr. Ray Johnson here on the Pastor's Study, Senior Pastor here at Dominion Outreach Worship Center, giving my response yet again on another wonderful Tuesday, joining in with the rest of my colleagues who participate in this as well. We've been spending a number of weeks talking about what's been happening, what's been going on in our nation, and what's been happening around the world, as I'm one of those that firmly believes that the heaven is really called America to be a lead in terms of bringing about change and transformation and according to heaven's design and according to heaven's will. As a practicing theologian and also a policy scientist well at the same time, I will see it today if I can begin to merge in the two to bring about the balance between the city of God and city of man, what many would call both the sacred and the secular. We've been given some questions to respond to, and so I'm going to take my stab at it and respond a little bit first on the first one. First question says to us, why are we so grieved with the happenings of our nation? You know, really, when we think about it, it's right in line with what I've already begun to mention to us today. And that is this. I believe that America was supposed to be a beacon on the hill. I believe that it was set aside by God. It's still a very, very infant project with its just powers, its balance of government, its ruling or governing on behalf of the consent of the governed, a republic that was founded really with the idea of religious liberty. But when we look at the lack of adherence to the ideals of America, and we see the chasms of distance that have begun to separate us from the issues of race, when we start to look at the issues of gender, even when we look at the issues of social economic status, we have yet to come to a place where we really have become one nation under God, one nation under God, indivisible with liberty
and justice for all. Y'all thought I was getting ready to use a big word, but it's just indivisible. Listen, I'm grieved because I believe that for the purposes of why this nation was established, for religious freedom, to extend the kingdom of God into other parts of the world, now we're having to have missionaries come to us, to evangelize us, to communicate to us, to become godly conscious again. And so I'm grieved with when I see injustice that happens, imbalance, weights, and scales that tend to take place in terms of how a matter is resolved, the loss of life among many different people. I think that we would do well to return back to the God of our fathers, to not even allow the idea of creating new norms or normalizing things that have not been apropos in a previous generation to become so important in our generation, in our time today, that we begin to water down the authenticity of what our nation, of what our country, and really what the church, the called out ones, the ecclesia, is to be about as ambassadors for the Lord Jesus Christ, to extend the kingdom of God into the earth. I think it becomes critically important for us that we've got to get back on mission and not really focus so much on division, but really stay focused on mission about why we're here and about what our roles of responsibilities are. And so that's why I'm so grieved about what's happening in our nation, because we're not living out the creed. You know, there was a senator, a state senator in our area from Chesapeake, ran for governor. And I thought that he was one of the sent ones from the Lord. Today, he works in prison fellowship today, Mark Early. And he had coined a phrase called the promise of Virginia. And that promise of Virginia is that from out of Virginia, if it could be the seedbed for division, Richmond being the capital of the Confederacy, certainly it can live out the promise that God has for our nation in terms of the pattern of Congress coming from the House of Burgess right there in Richmond from out of Virginia. So we've got a lot of work to do in terms of bridging gaps and crossing lines. And so
The ways that we can really impact the cultural and social unrest that's happening now is to really focus on creating the changes that we need, that are, needed. But that's the whole point of the unrest, right? Unrest is to bring attention to things that need to change. So let's get those changes. Let's work towards those changes. So on the one hand, it's, tearing down systems that oppress targeted communities and rebuilding systems that are more equitable and inclusive. And then on the other hand, it's the hard work. It's creating the culture shifts that we need to get to equality, equity, and fairness. So both of these tracks really require education. And so I think there's also room for activism and policy changes as well. And it's really important that we each find our lane and really get to work in that lane, because it's going to take a lot of us. So for instance, advocacy is really important in policy making. And when lawmakers hear the stories of lived experiences, it helps educate us to what residents are experiencing and how things need to change if it's different than what we're used to. And so if you've been impacted by gun violence or hunger, diabetes, substance abuse, mental health concerns, all of that, right? Your experience becomes a valuable source of information that can help educate others to what went wrong in order for this to happen, what should have been in place, what could have been in place, how could it have been prevented if it was preventable, and if it wasn't preventable, how best to deal with it or address it. All of that comes out through hearing the stories of people that have gone through these experiences. And so that's one thing. And how, if there were systemic, like, impacts of systemic racism or bias that also helped cause those things, then we need to know that so we can break that down. But then there's also this heart to heart work where it is thinking about us as people and how, a racist history or a racist country's history has impacted us. where can we make personal change and take personal responsibility and do better, come together more as a community, make sure that the ideals that we're proliferating for our youth are really helpful and healthy, and making sure our mental health concerns are in check, because literally it's okay to see someone after the 2 years that we've been through, and then you look across, from the situation, and it's like, all right, cool, racism, sexism, and economic injustice all impact lives. And then you have the oppressed, but then you also have the oppressor. And so white folks, for instance, need to speak out to help change other white folks' minds. And so that's within families, within congregations. The work of equity is not just up to the oppressed. And so when people talk about diversity, it shouldn't just be Black people at the table talking about diversity. And I think that's something that we have to really come to terms with. But I think it's, whether you're in education and awareness or activism or advocacy, it's creating the pressure in order for the changes to occur. Systems and people don't change without a reason to change. And that's just, it's the fact. So if we're doing that work of creating the pressure in the present moment, while we are reckoning with the racism and sexism and economic injustice of the past, then that will help us create this better future. And so, like I said, we each have a role to play. And it's the same thing with, like, you have racism and sexism too. It's like, all right, sometimes we have to look internally, and maybe speak out about religious systems that are devaluing the work of women, or the lives of women, or the humanity of women. And then women need to speak up about that, but men also need to look at what are the things that they're doing within these religious spaces that keep that going, in order for women to be treated differently and equitably within these spaces. And so, if you are Christian and you're looking at Jesus's example, I mean, he was all about listening to women and, surrounding himself with strong women. And so taking that as a lead, and then also he was fighting for those that are on the margins that have been oppressed. And he was a spokesperson for the poor, not the rich and comfortable. And so how do we look at our lives and really, really emulate the person that we say we are followers of? And I think it's really cool too, because I know that's a lot, but we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are organizations that are doing this work in all of these spaces, and they really just need more members, and they need more people to get involved, because I think the more folks we have working like for the better future, the quicker that better vision for our future can become reality. And so I'm really hopeful that, with all the things that we've been going through for a little more than a year now, but even some of the things we were going through pre-pandemic, we can make changes when we all work together. And so that's that sense of hope that I have, and really looking forward to making sure that we're all working together.
The next question is, what are we doing? What am I doing to affect the social and cultural unrest? I'm not using Facebook and Twitter. I'm not going typing 140 characters. And nowadays you can type as many characters as you want. I'm having conversations. I want a seat at the table of influence, to be able to have dialogue, to affect change. I'm going to the city town hall meetings. I'm talking to our elected officials. I'm sitting down with my white pastors and my Asian pastors and my black pastors to have great conversations so everyone can understand. Because here's the thing. We all just go off our own assumptions. So for me, the things I want to do and the things I'm doing to affect social and cultural unrest is being a voice, not just a keyboard stroker, not just being the one that's throwing out inflammatory tweets, inflammatory Facebook remarks. I want to sit at the table when the decisions are being made for my community, for my people. To sit and be complicit in silence, we can no longer do that. We have to go to not just our city halls, our PTA functions. Because a lot of this stuff starts in the schoolhouse. The equity, the inequity of our kids. So for me, my school knows who I am. They know I'm Layla's dad. They're going to know that I'm Langston's father. They're going to know Mr. Covington. I'm going to be the school dad. It starts in the schoolhouses. Then we have to go back to where the power used to be, the church house. When change started, it always evolved from a movement in the church. The church, we have grown silent in these cultural and social unrest because we don't want to say something, then our offering plates, get affected, or our membership dwindle down. We have to be able to speak truth to power and speak what is true. Not our opinions, but what is true. So for me, I'm starting in the schoolhouse. I'm having conversations with the teachers because I want to know what's being taught to my daughter. I want to know what's going to be taught to my son. So they'll be not only be able to understand American history, but their own history. So for me, to affect social and cultural unrest, it starts in the schools. It continues through the church house. We have to be able to speak truth to power and speak power to every situation because the Bible says death and life lie within the power of this muscle right here, the tongue.
You know, culture is a big thing in our society, and culture shapes everything. And what we see happening now is that there's a generation that's rising up and saying that they don't want to take what has happened in the past going into the future. So you're seeing a lot more unrest. You're seeing a lot more protest. You're seeing a lot more people who are standing up for their rights and for what they believe, and good for them. Our culture has been predominantly driven by white men. And now what we're seeing more so than ever before are people of all backgrounds and of all ages to say that there's more to America than just white men. That there's a diversity and there's a spirit in our country that is bigger than one particular ethnic group. So sometimes unrest is necessary to bring about change. And sometimes unrest is necessary because you have certain people that have power. And when a group of people, whether it's white men or in any other setting, when a group of people have power, they're going to do everything they can to keep it. And they're not going to want to let it go. If black people had power in this country, we would do everything we could to keep it too. So power is what drives a lot of what we see happening in our culture. And now there's an uprising and an unrest to say that power should be equally distributed. Now, in politics, you won't hear that. You won't hear that in other places. But that's what's happening. There's a time now where you're seeing more with Black Lives Matter. And the reason why Black Lives Matter is being politicized is because for the first time, the consciousness of America is really looking at how blacks are being treated in this country. And not everybody wants to hear that. Not everybody wants to see that. And so Black Lives Matter is a slogan, and it is also an organization. And yes, I have not agreed with everything that the organization has done, but I do agree with the slogan. And it does not mean that blue lives don't matter, and it doesn't mean that white lives don't matter, and it doesn't mean that rich lives don't matter. It just simply means that when you look at the context of our country, the history of our nation, 401 years that African Americans have been in this country, and the things that have happened disproportionately negatively in our favor, it is time to say that black lives do matter. So the unrest is coming because people are tired. We're tired of the narratives. We're tired of seeing police shoot and kill our people. We're tired of the fact that there's a legal system that sometimes puts us away twice the rate of other ethnic groups. We're tired of looking in our communities and seeing poverty, and in some cases, a lack of access to necessities that other communities have. And so sometimes unrest is necessary to shake the tree to bring about the change that we need to have. You add that to social media, where now anything can be filmed. And make no mistake, if George Floyd's murder wasn't recorded and blasted across social media, then I believe that the officer would not have been charged. Social media has changed the game because now everybody has access to cameras on their phone, and now everybody can broadcast it for the world to see. George Floyd's murder was the Emmett Till of the previous generation, where Emmett Till's mother, after he was beaten brutally and then killed, Emmett Till's mother said, you know what? I want his casket to be open so that the world can see what happened to my son. And when the world finally saw the imagery, the brutality of racism and bigotry, that shook people up. And the same thing is happening now. The unrest is stirring up because you have a camera on your phone. I have a camera on my phone. We can record now. And now people can see with their own eyes and experience firsthand what racism and bigotry and unrest really look like in this nation. So there is a shift that's happening. There is an unrest, and it's being broadcast across social media outlets for people to see.
So let me just get to the next question for us today. What are we doing to affect cultural and social unrest? I think we're beginning to use what Dr. King calls the language of the oppressed. When you saw some of the rioting and things that have taken place in the streets, I applaud the youth of our country and of our nation, because it's not just African Americans, it's a microcosm of young people from all different backgrounds, really even all different faiths, who are beginning to come together, and they're forcing the issue for us legislatively to begin to address some of the systemic and institutional issues that we have. And they're forcing the issue even inside of the local church. Now, y'all know I'm a churchman at heart. And I still believe, from the group of which I hail, sitting right here, if you could see on that right behind me, right next to the dial, is a sketch of the original Anabaptist building that I'm sitting in. If Milton Friedman was alive today, and he would see my dark face sitting on this camera right now, communicating to us, given the time of that time, he may roll over in his grave to find out that it's an African American, and a Pentecostal one at that is happening to be the steward of this facility. But some of the things that we've got to do to begin to address social unrest is, once we finish marching and once we finish putting pressure, we've got to mobilize, in my opinion, and begin to organize in such a way so that those who begin to share the values of which this great nation was founded upon, and I'm not talking about issues of race and slavery, I'm talking about the ideas of freedom for everybody. We've got to begin to now talk about what that looks like going forward into the next century, or into the next decades, if you will, that will keep us up into the next century. So I don't think we're doing enough, one, to begin to provide enough education so that people are really, really kind of going back to a civics lesson to understand what this is all about. We're not a democratic society. Contrary to popular opinion, we are a republic, which means that there is governance on behalf of the consent of the governed. Now, our electoral college system, as I'm sure Pastor Law and Delegate Price, as we affectionately call her, Sia, they'll speak to this in even more detail in regards to how our system of governance works. Now, it may be by way of popular vote, which is democratic, but the electoral college system still gives us the measure of a republic where each vote is counted. So you've got voting rights issues and things that are there that take place. But really, there's not going to be social change or cultural change until there is first spiritual change. I'll say it one more time. There will not be social change or cultural change until there is first spiritual change. We've got a spirituality problem in America. We're schizophrenic. We don't know who it is that we want to be. We don't even know what it is that we even believe anymore. We've said time and time again that we've gone from being a post-Christian or a postmodern, which is truth is relative to you, and whatever truth I believe is relative to me. to now what I call a post-Christian society, where those fundamental truths that we believe that are universal from the scripture, the 10 commandments of the Old Testament, and to be of this attitude, the 10 of those in the New Testament, those are really gone by the wayside. And now we're creating our own idea of truth, of what we believe that is. There cannot be social change. And there cannot be cultural change. Social, how we treat and connect with each other. Cultural, the actual learned behavioral patterns that are derived from our mores and our values, until there is a return first back to this one over here on the other side, that cross right there. Until we can get back to that cross where we're all at the foot of the cross is where we're all the same. I think are the things that we need to do. So there's got to be a serious spiritual awakening inside of the local church. And I'm talking about all faiths, all denominations, Lutheran, I'm talking Methodist, Episcopalian, I'm talking Baptist, I'm talking a charismatic, Pentecostal, Word of Faith. I'm talking, did I leave somebody out? I think I got them all. We've got to have a return back to that. Church of God in Christ, Church of God, holiness. Let's get them all in there. We've got to return back to God and the God of the scripture. Then there will be a spiritual awakening, which will produce social change, which will then bring about cultural change. I think those are the things that are necessary in order to bring about the changes of our day and of our time. Here's the next question that we were given. What are the next steps to truly receive equity, and equality? I just think it's a matter of giving an adherence, really, to what's already been written. I think America is the greatest nation on the face of the planet. I think that we here in America, with our ability to be able to pull all facets and forces, if you will, all quadrants and groups to the table to have a discussion about how we're going to lead. What does true freedom really look like? I believe that our concept of citizenship is one that is unique all throughout the world. And I think if we would give an adherence to what our framers really put in place, it's really a system of governance as a republic that will really work very well if we can do this. Now, I'm going back to the House of Burgess again. I'm coming right back to the original Bill of Rights. I'm coming right down to Article 15. And I'm coming right into what Hamilton began to pen when he wrote these words, when he said, it's the mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance one to another. Hear what I'm saying of what Hamilton said. It is the mutual duty of all citizens, all persons, to practice, not espouse with our mouths, not have a mental assent toward, but to practice Christian forbearance for all. A civil society works when we all begin to put in practice Christian forbearance. And then that's a different thing when we start to talk about public civic virtue, because that doesn't mean that everybody has to be a Christian in order to practice that forbearance. Jesus was not a Christian. I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, Pastor Swan, but y'all give me 2 or 3 more minutes. I promise you I'm getting ready to land the plane, coming around the mountain, only third closing right through here. Look, Jesus was not a Christian. He was a Middle Eastern man, dark skin, woolly hair. We understand that and we know that. But when his disciples and the Pharisees and the Sadducees were trying to trip him up, they asked him, what is the greatest commandment? He said that you love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and with all your strength. And then here's the second one. He says, it's like as unto it, that you love your neighbor as yourself. And that, my friends, is Christian forbearance one to another, that you treat others the way that you would want to be treated. Now, watch what I'm saying, that we treat others the way that we wanted to be treated in policy decisions, and how the Ways and Means Committee of Congresses and states determine how resources are going to be spent, of how they're going to impact households, of what the budget's going to look like, and how resources are going to be given into each state so that there is a better quality of life and people have the opportunity, and I've said this way, to make Virginia and the Peninsula a great place to live, work, and raise a family. And every local church has a chance to be able to extend the kingdom of God, because we come back to an adherence and a belief in that kind of an understanding. That would be my response to the 3 questions for the pastor's study. I hope that these spar some more conversation, and bring about some more dialogue and discussion. Make sure you put your comments right there in the chat, in the comments section, and we'll make sure we'll come back with you again. Thank you for giving me a chance to respond. God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.
What are our next steps to achieving equity and equality? But before we get into what our next steps are, those two words sound alike. And Pastor Swan is going to wrap the show up today. Right? I want to thank you all for listening to us today, to hear our hearts in front of the microphone. This is a powerful tool. This is a powerful tool. So many times we don't utilize that tool. And that tool, this just magnifies what comes out of here. But a lot of times we make mistakes because we don't even know what our next steps could be, because we don't even know where we're going. So I want to define what equity and equality is. Equity, what's the difference? Equity means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. Equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. You see how equal is in equity? But we just don't want equity. Equity, as we talk about, equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances. Equality means each individual group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. So equality, you give me the same opportunity, the same resources. But equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances. So in school, because I just graduated my master's in counseling, we talk about equity versus equality, because each person, this is a dictionary. I could have this, but if my circumstances dictate that I can't read what's in the pages, I need equality. I need you to come. I need resources to meet me where I am, so I can achieve what I need. For those on Facebook, a picture's going to come on the screen, but for those who are listening to this show, I want to take time and be able to explain this graphic that's coming up. It's coming up, and we're going to talk about it. But it's three people. It's two pictures, but it's three people in each picture. Rather, I'm sorry. The first one has equality. Has a man standing on the box. He's taller, and he's on the box. That's equality. Everybody get the same box to stand up on. But if my stature is already tall, I can already see over. I don't need that. That's not speaking to my circumstances. The second young man, he's not tall enough to see over the box. Or over the fence, rather. But he has that one box so he can see. The third young man, he kind of remind me in height of my son. He can't see over. He got the same box. He had the same opportunity. But the resources that were given to him, they don't match. They're not allocated to his direct need. It's not speaking to who he is as a person. Now let's flip over to equity. We not only need equality, we need equity. The same three people. The man that's tall that can see with a fence, he don't need the resources. He don't need the extra money. He don't need the extra influence. He already has it to be able to see over the fence. The second young man, he's not tall enough, but I'm going to get you this box so you can see and be at the same height as the other gentleman. The third person on two boxes to be able to see so he can see the same way the other two can. So in school, they have what we call the 504 plans, right? So you have special accommodations for students that need, maybe read aloud or read along to be able to understand the same thing that another student that doesn't have that deficiency. So the students have the same books, but without the resources meeting them where they are, the equity, they can't really be who they need to be in that moment. So a common thread for me is education. One of the reasons why I feel like that we struggle is because we don't give back, but we don't start where we need to be at. It's in the schools. It's in the PTA programs. Next steps for us as a people is getting back involved into our schoolhouses. So that not only will we get the equality with the materials, but the equity to make sure that once the materials are there, that those who are there, they're getting what they need. And not just giving them a book with the information, but ensuring they know how to unlock that book and get that information out of it. So for me, like I said, I'm going to City Hall. I'm going to the town meetings. I'm going to PTA meetings. The principal will know Jason Covington. Not because I'm up there causing a ruckus and causing a fuss, because he needs to know that I'm involved in my kid's life. They gonna know who Michelle is. Not because she is a quote-unquote angry black woman. No, because she's involved in what's going on in the schoolhouse. To make sure that Layla and Langston not only have the equality, but have the equity. So that once they get the resources, they have the same opportunities. And the opportunities to make sure they meet them where they are. So they can utilize those opportunities. So I believe to have equity and equality, we must go back to the schools and stay in the schools and make sure our kids are being taught. And don't leave until you know your kid is getting what they need. It's imperative. It's so very, very important that we, as a people, stay in the schools. We shouldn't be out getting J's at 5 o'clock in the morning, but we can't go to a PTA meeting at 7 o'clock at night. We can go and stand in long lines and wait for the newest and hottest Apple product, but we can't go and stay with our kids as they go into tuition or they're going to the back to school nights. We have to change our priorities. That's my second next step. Our priorities have to change. It can't just be about me. It has to be about we, us, and the collective. Because, as I always say, if I'm good, my family's good. I'm never going to be amazing and excited and excellent and my family's struggling. It's just not going to happen. So we need to make sure that we stay in our schoolhouses and our priorities change so that we can receive equity and equality. Pastor Swan, final word. What you got for us, bro?
So many things that are happening in our country that keep us divided. What can really happen to bring us together? How can we really achieve equality and, in some cases, equity in our country? Well, as a pastor, I'm always going to start with the spiritual lens. Our country has never been more disconnected spiritually than we are right now. The research has shown that more people now are religiously unaffiliated than at any point in the history of our country. People have walked away from the church in droves, and not just Christianity, but other faiths and religions as well. So as a pastor, I'm going to start with the fact that I believe that there's a spiritual satanic attack against bringing people together. You can't even see it in media. You watch one newscast, they're attacking the other side. You watch another newscast, they're attacking the other side. Division actually is good for ratings and it sells newspapers, but it's not good in terms of bringing people together. And I believe that until Jesus' words have been fulfilled, where he said, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men and women unto me, that we will continue to have these struggles. Never before in the history of our country has people in the country been more religiously unaffiliated than we are right now. People are leaving the church in droves, and not just the church, but other faiths and religions as well. It is a lack of a moral centering that I believe is causing the division. I liken us to fractions. The only way you can add and subtract fractions is that you first have to find the common denominator. When you first find the common denominator, then both fractions can line up. Then you can add and subtract fractions after that. Well, where is the common denominator in our society today? It's not politics. It's not race. It's not LGBTQ issues. It's not even the church. The common denominator has to be Christ, in my opinion. Until there is a moral centering, until there's a place where we can agree to come together on a certain issue, and that for me is Christ, then you can start talking about what equality and equity looks like. However, because most people nowadays are moving away from the church, what else can be done? Well, there can still be laws that can be passed. There can still be awareness that can be raised. There's still things where we need to educate people on the disparities in our country. More education is needed than ever before to teach people why these systems are in place to keep people from being equal. It's not just what's in people's heart. It is also the systems and the structures that have been built in our society that also intentionally keep equity from happening in our country. We have to be courageous enough to address those systems and structures. We have to be willing to really call it for what it is. And for those who are in power and in leadership positions, they have to be bold enough to want to confront those systems and structures and see them changed. So from a spiritual lens, we lack in our country a moral centering. From a non-spiritual perspective, we lack the ability to really address the systems and the structures that cause inequities and inequalities in our country. And until those two things happen, you'll still find division will reign in our country, and we will never truly be the United States of America.
And let me say, as I've always said, and I will always continue to say, that riots are socially destructive and self-defeating. I'm still convinced that non-violence is the most potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle for freedom and justice. I feel that violence will only create more social problems than they will solve, and that in a real sense it is impractical for the Negro to even think of mounting a violent revolution in the United States. So I will continue to condemn riots and continue to say to my brothers and sisters that this is not the way. Continue to affirm that there is another way. But at the same time, it is as necessary for me to be as vigorous in condemning the conditions which cause persons to feel that they must engage in riotous activities as it is for me to condemn riots. I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. What is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. And so in a real sense, our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention.